Hello and welcome to VentureBeat Transform 2022. My name is Amit Pandey and I head strategy and growth at Avizo. Our session here today will focus on two things: driving predictable growth and mitigating risk. Both topics are top of mind for CEOs today. In fact, the Chief Executive Magazine survey that came out just last month says that CEO confidence among American CEOs is right now at 5.5 on 10, the lowest it's been in the last 10 years. The good news is that we have an extraordinary panel here today to help us with looking at exactly these two issues. I'd like to quickly welcome Charles Forsgard, Lori Harmon, and Brian Young, who I'll be introducing next. These leaders have been at the forefront of helping boards and CEOs navigate exactly these two issues, driving predictable growth and managing risk. And they've done it across Fortune 500 companies, as well as they've done it across high tech and high growth companies in the US and internationally. First, I'd like to introduce Lori Harmon. Lori is the Vice President of Business Development at Cloudflare. Prior to Cloudflare, Lori was Vice President of Global Renewal Sales, Digital Sales, and Customer Success at NetApp. Lori is also the author of the book 42 Rules for Building a High Velocity Inside Sales Team. Welcome, Lori. Next, I'd like
Thanks,
to
Amit.
introduce Brian Young. Brian is an advisor, investor, and board member at several deep technology companies. Most recently, Brian was the Global Chief Commercial Officer at Johnson Controls. Previously, Brian was Chief Commercial Officer at Tyco, and he's had a distinguished career in sales and business leadership positions, including for 28 years at 3M. Welcome, Brian. Last but not least, I'd like to welcome Charles Forsgard from Honeywell. I've been a fan of Charles since I first came across his book 6 years ago. Like Lori, Charles is an author. His book is titled Stop Kidding Yourself. The way you're managing your salespeople is not helping them. Other than being an author, Charles is the Global Vice President for Sales at Honeywell. And prior to Honeywell, Charles was the GM for sales at GE Automation and Controls. And he also has had a distinguished career across sales and business leadership positions at Schneider Electric. Charles, Brian, and Lori, welcome to this session. I'd like to kick us off, with you first, Brian. And, I'd like to start with the current environment. In your view, what makes the current business environment different from when the pandemic started? And how do you see decision makers buy software differently in this environment?
Yes, thank you, Harmon. It's great to be here with you and the group. I guess I'd start by saying, if you think back to January of 2020, I was leading a sales force globally of about 10,000 people, and if you'd have told me at that time that by the end of April we would be in an entirely virtual selling motion, I probably would have passed out. We when the world kind of shut down in March, we grounded the sales force and said, you're not going out anymore, and everything's got to be virtual. And it was actually remarkable how quickly we spun up a virtual sales model. But as we learned through that pandemic, lost without the face-to-face sale, and started to get into, or certainly as myself, as I started to get introduced to new technologies that could enable the sales process in a more virtual world. I think what you've been seeing over the last, I'll call it 18 months, is companies looking to, again, enhance that virtual model, even though we're going back to face-to-face and or perhaps a hybrid mode. Technologies that can enhance the virtual selling model, things like Aviso, where they close that were created by losing that face-to-face sale or the direct coaching, side-by-side coaching, work with a sales manager and a salesperson. So I think you see a lot of sales leaders and executives looking for technologies to speed up and enhance the sales process, drive productivity, and enhance growth.
Charles, what has been your experience with what seems to be different and similar to 2 years ago?
Well, the interesting thing, and much like Brian, if you had told me in February that by April we'd be 100% virtual, I would have been thinking you were smoking something. But it was a very fast change. The interesting thing is, for us, a lot of counterintuitive things happened because when we went to virtual and we stopped traveling, the net number of customer touches went up. In fact, for us, the net number of customer touches went up by 3x. The interesting thing for us was that increased number of customer touches, planned and followed up on customer touches, led to a 1.5x increase in deal creations and deal closures. So our business has grown tremendously despite that. Now that's led to all the different challenges that we have had to deal with for supply chain and inflation and everything. But because my business has got some software, but it's primarily hardware. But it's not what you would have expected at all. But when you think about it in hindsight, it does make a lot of sense. If we're touching customers more, you're going to be doing more things and getting more business. But with that much more stuff in play, that's where software tools for the sales force become that much more important, because the most important thing the sellers need now is focus.
Building on that point about focus, Lori, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, I completely agree with the comments that Charles and Brian made. So just to add to that, I would say clearly the pandemic created a lot of uncertainty, but many companies, as Charles mentioned, benefited from that because they had more touches for customers, or maybe they benefited because they were a vendor that were helping companies to set up their remote sales forces. And so I think that uncertainty actually panned out well. And I know what I saw last year is a lot of growth where I was. But now that we're going into recession, there's more uncertainty, but it's a different kind of uncertainty because companies are pulling back on their spending. So I think that also makes tools much more important, especially AI-based tools that can help companies determine what is our forecast. Are reps really going to be able to understand quickly the macroeconomic environment that's going to affect their deals? Probably not, because there's so much information required in figuring that out. So it makes AI-based forecasting, like that provided by Aviso, so much more important as we go into this new level of uncertainty. Uncertainty with the pandemic before, and now the uncertainty with the recession.
Lori, I love that line, a different kind of uncertainty. And if we can stay with you for the shift gears to our next topic, which is, so in this different kind of uncertainty, what would you say revenue leaders need to do to align their sales plays and selling motions to better align with these B2B buyers, many of whom are incredibly digitally savvy as well?
Well, there's a lot, right? There's a lot that they can do. So if you look at the journey, the customer journey, and how we get to closing deals with customers, I think that we need to look at the beginning, right? You need to figure out, like when you're getting in leads, how are they scored properly? So that if you have a sales development or business development team, they can know which leads to focus on. As Charles was saying about number of touches, like, do I do 20 touches for this lead and 5 touches for this lead? Then you take it into companies that are doing digital selling. So when you get into a digital purchase, what if your customer somehow gets confused, right? When do you insert a human into that process and help them get over that line to buy digitally, even though it should be hands off? Sometimes it's not. And as you move further into more people-led or field-led sales or virtual-led sales, where more salespeople are involved, it's even more important to have the right technology. So you're focusing your salespeople on the right deals. So for example, AI technology can say, I have a $1 million deal and I have a $500,000 deal. And naturally, what a salesperson is going to do is they're going to focus all their time on the $1 million deal. But what if that deal's already in the bank, right? What if they really need to spend more time on the $500,000 deal so they get both? The only way for them to figure something like that out is to have AI-based technology to give them those indicators to say, hey, you need to spend more time on this deal. This deal's in the bank, and you just need to give up on this third deal because it's not happening right now. Because time is so precious for salespeople. I think it's a Gartner metric that says customers only spend 17% of the time with a salesperson. So let's say they're looking at 3 different solutions. That's 17 divided by 3. All their other time is spent online doing research. And so much of their decision is made before they get to your sellers. So the sellers need to be spot on when to contact, who to contact, and what deals to focus on to make them and to maximize their efficiency in terms of closing deals.
Brian,
so, I could go on, but I need to get the other participants in here because there are so many things I could say about technology and helping sellers today.
Lori, I love those statistics. I was thinking, it's 1 in 6 minutes. Gosh, it's 1 in 18 minutes. You have very little time as a vendor to be in the actual discussion process. Brian, what has been your experience, not just from Johnson Controls, but also all the startups that you're advising that are going through some of the same challenges that Lori shared from her experience with high tech?
Yeah, I think, again, as we shift the sales motion, it's all about speed and productivity and leverage on your spend, right? So, from a selling leadership perspective, from a seller perspective, enabling the sales process as most efficiently as possible. I think the other thing that you're seeing is, and I think Lori touched on it a bit, is the concept of team selling, and as the buyer is working through, the seller's working through, the buyer's working through their journey, the selling process along that journey involves a lot of different stakeholders on the sales team, if you will. Maybe a technical resource, maybe a sales resource, maybe a support resource, maybe an executive resource touch point. But enhancing that sales process with tools that allow the sales team to collaborate, and I'll use the Aviso term, swarm around the customer. I think that's a really critical part of our new sales process.
Charles, would love to hear your view on this question as well.
I'll tell you, you can just take everything that Lori said and then just put my name next to it, because I agree 1,000%. And particularly the thing, and I probably made a weird face when she said it, talk about you got someone who's trying to figure out how to make it to their number. They gravitate automatically to the biggest deal in the pipe. And that is often the wrong deal to gravitate. And personally, the biggest thing that I've gotten out of using predictive analytics in deals is talking to the sellers from two perspectives. One, what are the deals you should be focusing on to make your number? What are the ones that have the best chances? But then two, what are the ones that you might think you've got in the bag, but that actually the AI thinks has some risks? And one of the most critical things you get out of a good AI tool like Aviso is it doesn't just give you a score, it tells you why. And the opportunity for really productive coaching conversations between the sales manager and the seller, which is really, if you're doing this, should be your whole intent, is how do I do better coaching? The tool's telling you right off the bat, hey, these are 4 things that look funky with this deal or that look great with this deal. And it can help the sales manager really effectively coach the seller on how to think about the deal better. And if they're doing it right, they're doing it Socratically and saying, hey, the AI says this. Why do you think it might be saying that? And then what do you think you could do about it? And as you draw that out of the seller, if they say what the answer is, then it's their idea, not yours. And they're that much more likely to go along with it. And so what I found with a tool like Aviso, the biggest thing it gives me is I'm getting better and better coaching conversations going on between the sales managers and the sellers.
Thank you, Charles. I'm reminded of so many of the concepts around seller-centered design that you'd originally covered in your first book. I hope you do a version 2 of it now, post all these changes that are happening in the world. Shifting gears to our next topic, Charles, I'd like to stay with you and build upon this. We're getting into some of the juiciest bits of not only how AI can be used in the sales function, but how in all your cases you've been seeing the power of AI and predictive analytics for many years now. It's not exotic anymore. It's mainstream, and people who are not using it are in fact behind the 8 ball. So my question to you would be that when you look at areas like sales forecasting, team coaching, or customer collaboration, where do you see the future of how AI can further help? And building upon some of your practical experience with AI technologies such as Aviso, what are some of the actual benefits and ROI that you've seen at a business of the scale of Honeywell?
So, I mean, just from a straight ROI, and it's never just the tool, right? It's the whole process that you're using the tool with. I reminded the old thing, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So you got to be careful how you use it. I think the biggest trick with it is never making it feel like Big Brother to the sales team. They have to look at it as a tool for them, not a tool for management to beat them up with. And as you do that, I think it puts you in a position to engage a broader part of the organization in deals. And the reason I say that is it makes it that much easier for everybody to get a sense of what's going on with the deal without these super long briefings. People can kind of read in the tool what's going on. I think from the future right now, you've got a certain segment of sales and sales management that have embraced the concept. Some people have it and they've kind of caught up to that degree, but they haven't figured out yet how to use it, how to make it part of their operating system, so to speak. So really, that in the medium term, I see more and more people finding the way it fits with their sales operating system. But I think in the long term, the bigger benefit, and we've started to see this at Honeywell, is it makes it that much easier for me to engage engineering, to engage supply chain in the deals, particularly the bigger deals, which in the past might have been done more, hey, the glorious sales team will go out and bring home this big elephant, and then everybody has to figure out how the heck we're going to build it, right? And instead, we're doing it much more collaboratively. And it's an interesting thing. Every quarter, we do a town hall and we talk about the big deals that were won. And every time the story we tell about how that deal was won, it's never about just the seller. It's always about all the different parts of the organization that came together as a team to do it. And what I'm starting to see now is we get more and more people into a tool like a Viso, which is so much more accessible than Salesforce for a non-seller to get at the information. We're getting more and more people looking at the deals and offering insights on them. And I think that's really where the future is, because Aviso is so much more accessible than conventional CRMs. It just makes it easier for everybody to see what's going on with the deal and engage on it.
It takes several villages to close a deal. I'd love to kind of reflect on that. Lori, with some of your experience with teams of all sizes, including business development and SDR teams, and you have this unique lens from the world of high tech. Would love your take on this question.
Well, I'm going to tap into what Brian said about team selling and what Charles said about collaboration, because one of the things that you can do, and this goes back to the ROI, is when in a product like Aviso, you can set up it's either a war room, you could call it a digital selling room. So you could either invite your internal stakeholders, so you're not spending a bunch of time in all these meetings briefing people. They can see all the flow of the deal online in the tool. And that is about rapid collaboration and saving time and getting through more deals and having more time to spend with customers and doing those customer touches. You can also set up like a digital collaboration room with your customers. And right there, you can provide them with quotes. You can provide them with, any information you're sharing, PowerPoints, data sheets. You can see if they're engaged and are they inviting other people to be engaged with your content, so you can really understand the customer engagement. So not only do you have the internal collaboration, you're collaborating with customers in a way that they want to collaborate, because everyone is moving to a more digital environment. And one of the key things for sellers is to help customers when they're dealing with other vendors, right? And you've only got the 17% of their time. You kind of want to knock out all the nonsense and only give them what they want to need. So you're making sense of the solution they're buying. And you can do that by providing them the right information in those digital sales rooms that they can consume. And you can understand either through that or through other tools that, like conversational intelligence, that they're engaged or not with your deal and whether they're going to move forward. So I think that's really key to getting quick ROI, is selling the way the buyer wants to buy and quick collaboration with your internal teams and having the AI on top of that to give you those key insights.
Brian, what are some of your thoughts, especially with sampling the different companies that you've been looking at, over the past year? Of course, in addition to the transformation you've got Johnson Controls.
Yeah, so I'll certainly agree and reinforce everything that Charles and Lori said. Whether it be conversational intelligence or forecasting or collaborative selling, all the tools that are available. As I touched on earlier, in the new sales world, leaders like myself and those on the call here are looking for ways to enhance that sales process. And I'll take ROI from a different perspective, certainly agreeing with everything that's already been said. But one of the places that I felt friction was as I looked at point solutions to solve these problems, whether, again, conversational intelligence, team selling, automated input into the CRM, forecasting accuracy, whatever it was, every one of those required a commercial engagement with a particular vendor. And for my personal time, and then the time of the purchasing team and the supply chain team and the IT team, it became a real source of friction. And what was so magical for me, actually, when I found Aviso was not only did it provide better point solutions, but it did that in one single pane of glass, as you talk about. But for me on my end, it eliminated 7 to 10 commercial negotiations and pilots and just the burden of going through buying a solution that would enable our sales process. So again, agree with everything that was said from the benefits of these new tools. But I think one of the most undervalued benefit from a return on investment perspective is just the simplicity of the commercial process to onboard a technology like Aviso.
I've become a huge fan of the term single pane of glass, even within our internal teams, and often the question of saying, can you give me a single pane of glass view for, this function? So, as we get to the home stretch here in our panel discussion, one of the things I'm reflecting on hearing from all of you is that folks who are not doing this today, revenue leaders or business leaders who have not even started on the journey with AI in 2022, are now going to fall behind the curve a little bit faster. And if companies like Honeywell, which have transformed themselves so many times, and others like Johnson Controls over several decades, are able to embrace the power of AI and analytics, then everybody should. So my last question for you, and perhaps I can start off with you on this, Brian, is what would be some practical 2 or 3 tips you would offer to revenue leaders who are looking to catch up quickly by applying AI to manage this environment in 2022 and 2023?
Yeah, so I got a couple practical tips. One is, don't wait. NBC, it's perhaps cliche, but there's no better time to get started than now. If you haven't started, you've got to get in and look at all the tools available. Certainly, I would recommend, from my experience, the capabilities provided by Aviso, but you got to get started. But I think on a parallel path, you have to plan for success, particularly if you're a small company. And it'll come back to something that Charles said earlier, and that is, on a parallel path to enabling with technology, you really got to have robust process, because I think as you grow, and I've seen this time again with smaller companies that I'm advising, is they love the technology, but they're growing so fast, candidly, that the process is loose, and without kind of the marriage of robust process with robust technology, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. So again, I'd say get started. Embrace some of these fabulous new technologies like Aviso, but don't forget process. You have to have robust process, because today, if you have 5 sales people and 5 sales support people, in the future you're going to have 5,000, and you just can't operate without robust process.
Lori?
Well, again, I have to agree with Brian. You have to have your processes before you implement any tool, or it won't be successful. But you have to start now, because if you're not starting, your competition probably is, and you're going to fall behind. And it's even more important now, and I mentioned this earlier, because we're going into much more uncertain economic times. So figure out where your biggest risk is. If you can't do everything, where's your biggest risk? And where can you apply the AI to solve that risk, and start there, and then you can branch out and add more functionality. But if you wait, you're just going to fall behind, the industry and also your competitors, and you can't afford to do that to be successful.
Thank you, Lori. Charles, so what would be your advice to revenue leaders, many of whom are getting baptized by this second, I guess, gray rhino crisis, as some are calling it?
Yeah. So at first, I want to very much echo what Brian said about the process and how Lori echoed it, because if you don't have a process, I feel firmly sales is half art, but half of it is science. And it can't just be, I'm a really good salesperson, I'll just go out there and do it. It doesn't work, especially when you're thinking about the number of deals in a pipeline that people are working on. And that's why that focus element you get from a good tool like Aviso is so important. But as you do that, I think the biggest piece of advice I would say to anybody trying to roll something like this out is make it about the seller. Don't make it about management reports. Don't make it about, I have to explain this to my boss. Make it about, hey, how are we using this to be smarter about the deals we're pursuing and how we're doing it. And then the second big piece of advice I'd give is be patient. Be patient with the AI, because what happens over time as the AI learns more about your sales team and individual sellers and their habits and how they behave, it gets more and more accurate. And, at first it's okay, but as it gets more and more of a timeline of your team's behavior, the AIs get spooky good at it. One of the ones I worked with once, we had 4 years of data in it, and it was scary what it would know and how accurate it was. So that I just say, even if it's not giving you exactly what you want out of the box, give it time. That's one of the great things about AIs. They learn. The more data they've got, the better they're going to get.
One of the things that you're reminding me in hearing all three of you on this last question is that our human ability to learn and keep improving has to keep pace with the pace with which AI is learning and improving and getting better. And certainly looking at DAL-E and a lot of these other AIs out there that are now able to generate images from a description of a line, it's sort of a reminder of the frontier we're in. Would you, I'm just going to open the floor up to all, three of you. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left. Would you have any other thoughts you'd like to share from your journey with AI? You've all been using AI and advanced analytics now for several years, and I think that for a lot of the VentureBeat audience that is used to seeing the power of AI in R&D and product, hoping that this session gets them all excited about using more and more AI technologies. Any other closing thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
I'm just going to reinforce something that Brian said earlier about looking for a platform versus siloed products, because he mentioned how complicated it is for procurement and for IT and for himself to do all those negotiations, and also IT to do multiple integrations. So I think when you're looking for a solution, it's really important to look for a platform solution which gives you much better a total cost of ownership and much quicker ROI than trying to implement a bunch of point products. And I just can't emphasize enough how important the point that Brian made is, which is why I wanted to reinforce it one more time.
And I'd agree with that point. I think Brian had a very big issue with that. Yeah. I would say one more thing, which is that as you look at the tool and the platform and how you're going to use it, really think about how you'd use it in a coaching environment, because how you use the coaching is really going to impact how the salespeople feel about it.
Brian, did you have a closing thought on this?
I did. Just back to the point that Lori was reinforcing on my point. And she touched on it early, but as we go into this recessionary environment, the competition internally for funding, again, you find the technology that you fall in love with. You don't want to find a technology that you fall in love with 7 different times and go back and try to find the money to do those things. There's going to be extraordinary competition for funding internally. And again, reinforcing that kind of one single pane of glass, one commercial negotiation. I think it's a really important point, particularly as we're going into this new and very difficult environment.
Thank you so much, Brian, Charles, and Lori, for your time here today. I feel like there are several spin-off sessions we can have on this topic. I'll summarize by saying that for all the audience that is listening to this, that AI is very real for the sales function. It's here, it's been proven, and the world's best companies are using it. You can do a lot more with less with the power of AI. With that, we'll call it a wrap. And I'd like to thank you all once again for this extraordinary session and for sharing your expertise and wisdom with our audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.